Coming up, Res 2022 is a wrap. We bring you interviews with Native leaders, government officials, and artists. And we mourn the loss of our relatives in Texas. I am Malia Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
This is the ICT Newscast with Leah Chavez.
Amarawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. The ICT Newscast is broadcasting from the 2022 Reservation Economic Summit in Las Vegas this week. This is the homeland of the Nuuvi, also known as the Southern Paiute people. In the United States, people are now able to order another round of free rapid COVID-19 tests. Last week, the White House announced that tests are eligible to be reordered using its website, covid.gov/tests. Each household can place an order for free, and each order comes with 8 rapid tests. To order online, you can visit the website covid.gov/tests. To order by phone, you can call 1-800-232-0233. The number again is 1-800-232-0233. A new initiative by the University of California, Berkeley is aiming to get more Native students studying law. Earlier this month, Berkeley Law announced it will pay for tuition for students who live in California and who are also from a federally recognized tribe. Dean of Admission and Financial Aid, Kristen Thace Alvarez, said this was important because Native Americans are underrepresented in law schools across the country. She said she hopes one day the tuition assistance can be granted to Native students who are not California residents. Berkeley law student Asuncion Hampson Medina says the new aid will have a significant impact for Indigenous students. New students and continuing students who meet the criteria will start receiving gift aid this fall. Many think of the business world as renewable energy, economics, or the hospitality industry, but part of that would also be the fashion industry. Bethany Yellowtail has built her business in 13 years. She said it wasn't just about building a fashion brand, but bringing economic prosperity to Indigenous communities.
I come from a community where there's people who are making things all the time, and of course we want to dress our people. It's important that we, represent in our own communities too. However, the bigger picture is how that impacts our direct families, right? Because Native entrepreneurs, when we invest in Native entrepreneurs, it means we're investing in Native families, which means we're investing in Native communities.
Cora X says it's because of Bethany and a change in culture that the Indigenous fashion industry is booming.
I feel like there's a movement of all of us as Indigenous people are starting to heal. We're starting to come back and be really proud of who we are. And then that's through showcasing our artwork as we come to events like this, or, in the business world, or whether it's every ready to wear. I think that the industry is really booming right now.
At Res 2022, a fashion show was held where 3 different Indigenous designers showed off their work. Moving from the runways in Las Vegas to the runways in Bolivia, Indigenous designers are showcasing the unique Cholita fashion trends. This week, Aymara women lit up the night in El Alto in the ready-to-wear clothes this trend is known for. Around 20 Indigenous models displayed bowler hats, pleated dresses, and ponchos. Items were made from the expensive vicuña wool. Coveted in Italian fashion houses, the wool is considered a fine fiber in the Andean region. One of the 15 designers from the show talked about some of the ways Indigenous fashion is helping the country.
Bueno, la intención En primer lugar es bueno impulsar justamente reactivar el tema económico.
The intention is, first, to boost the economy fairly, because we can say the pandemic brought us lows. Festivities have been canceled, such as the Great Power and other festivities that make the economy move.
Designers say they also hope to sell off clothing for the religious festivities that were canceled in previous years due to the pandemic. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, ag policy for Indian country and young leaders step up, and sending prayers as we mourn the loss of our relatives in yet another mass shooting. Stay with us. The ICT News crew has been at the Reservation Economic Summit in Las Vegas this week. Sponsored by the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development, Caitlin Onawa-Boisel gave us a preview.
In Las Vegas, Nevada, thousands of people will gather for RES 2022. It's an opportunity for Native entrepreneurs and business owners to come and grow their craft. Attendees spend a span of 3 days networking, developing business plans, and one-on-one consulting. The CEO and president of the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development, Chris James, says he's impressed by Native resilience.
Today, I am proud of what the people in this room did through harsh and difficult times, and that we're now meeting at a moment of tremendous optimism and opportunity.
The conference features speakers and workshops with tribal leaders, members of Congress, federal officials, and state and local lawmakers, and even top CEOs. Some of the topics include gaming, entrepreneurship, business, healthcare, and even entertainment. Last year, actor and producer Wes Studi says now is the time.
One of the things that I have always heard about the business that I'm in is that, oh, well, they're telling our stories. I think a time is coming very soon wherein we're able to mesh the capital that's required to actually finance our own stories. And that's when we'll be able to say that, yes, this is a total Native perspective film.
RES had over 200 exhibitor booths on the floor and over 6,000 sessions to attend in 2021. Alyssa London returns hosting RES TV this year. She says they have been working hard to bring the best this year.
I mean, it just keeps getting bigger every year, and this is really only the second one that we've been able to get back together since COVID. And so I know that the team has, put a lot of time and effort to make sure that there are a lot of venues for Native business leaders to connect, and I think we'll have a really good time.
In Las Vegas, Nevada, Caitlin Onawa-Boisel, ICT News.
On day one, Chris James told us that after the pandemic, RES 2022 presents a great opportunity for entrepreneurs, especially artisans.
For the National Center, we've done pretty well through the pandemic with RES. Seems like we've hit a couple of positive windows, which is just pure luck, and I think good planning. With our artisans, because of the ability to double the amount of artisans that we have, we'll have vendors that are selling jewelry and other handmade crafts. We vet all of our artists through a process so that we authenticate what they're selling. So that's exciting too. And yeah, they're ready to sell. I mean, with just behind us, we can see them setting up and they're ready to go. Those artisans are businesses, and being able to support them is really important to us at the National Center. And also those artisans, they get a full pass to RES. So they can go to any of the sessions, they can eat, they can go to the reception, and that was really important to us to really infuse them into the event.
More than 4,000 Indigenous leaders and students gathered, but we were all stunned to learn of yet another mass shooting, this time in Texas. I asked Paui Rivera about it. He's a senior advisor to the White House's Office of Intergovernmental Affairs.
I think it's something that weighs heavy on all of our hearts. The president spoke on it yesterday, calling for the need to take action, from all of our colleagues. I know it affected many of us personally. Obviously it was a local issue to Uvalde, but it's a national tragedy, and certainly grieve for those families, and as the president said, we need to take action.
Rivera described the commitment President Biden has to Indian country.
It's important for tribal leaders to know that they have a place to go in the White House, that they have a seat at the table, that their voices are being heard and listened to. Since the beginning of the administration, we've really made an effort to ensure that tribal voices are a main part of all the things that we do, whether it's infrastructure development, whether it's through the American Rescue Plan, whether we're talking about environmental justice, whether we're talking about housing, right? Our communities, our governments cross all sections, and so we want to ensure that tribal leaders have a voice. And so through our consultation policy in the first 6 days of the administration, I think we were successful and able to make sure that tribal leaders do have a place to provide meaningful input and that they're listened to. And so here at the Economic Summit, we really want to make sure that tribal leaders understand that economic development and prosperity, self-determination of tribal communities is absolutely a part of the Biden-Harris administration's agenda, and we want to try to guide tribal leaders in helping them understand all the resources and technical assistance that's available to them, and certainly there's a lot. So we have a great team out here through our White House Council on Native American Affairs that are spending all day providing that kind of support and education to our leaders, and we're just excited to be here and engage with folks.
One of Rivera's jobs is to make sure that the 574 federally recognized tribes get the access to needed resources.
In the White House, there's many different offices. We have our policy offices, our engagement offices, intergovernmental affairs. Really, we handle everything from tribal governments, state governments, local governments, municipal governments, everything that's not Congress. So really it's positioned there to provide parity and ensuring that tribal nations are placed in an office that respects the nation-to-nation relationship. So we're sort of the connective tissue to all our different offices within the White House, to the president, and all our different principal offices, the vice president, the first lady, second gentleman, and we really do our best to ensure that tribal leaders are able to connect with everyone, that we can help answer questions, that we can help work with our colleagues across the federal family to really ensure that tribal governments are being listened to and that they can provide meaningful input. So we're sort of the entry point, but also in a very specific way, ensuring that tribes are viewed as governments, both intentionally and then the way that we work with them on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you for your commitment to building a strong nation-to-nation relationship with our administration. And please know that President Joe Biden and I are committed to being a strong partner with you.
The Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. is working to improve its relations with tribal nations. At the helm is Heather Dawn Thompson. She is the director of the Agriculture Department's Office of Tribal Relations.
I'm just really honored to work for this secretary and this administration. They've been so forward-leaning on the initiatives they're working on. I think three that are particularly important that Indian country's been paying attention to is one, the secretary announced a commitment to expansion of tribal self-determination. And while that might seem really commonplace for those that work with Department of Interior a lot, it's not something we've really been focusing on at Department of Agriculture. So that's been relatively historic, and we're very excited about that. Second is the Indigenous Food Sovereignty Initiative, which I think we're going to talk a little bit more about. And then third is a joint secretarial order, which is between Secretary Vilsack from USDA and Secretary Holland from the Department of Interior, that encourages us as the primary federal public trust land managers, so U.S. Forest Service, BLM, national parks, to really work better with tribal nations and to find opportunities to manage those properties together.
Food sovereignty is a new initiative at the Agriculture Department.
It is my most favorite initiative and what I'm most passionate about. The Department of Agriculture is amazing. It's one of the largest departments in the entire federal government. And we touch on all aspects of life in rural America, which means rural Americans are Native Americans, right, for the most part. But if it had been designed from the beginning from an Indigenous perspective, it would probably look quite different, right? I say it's the buffalo and berry plan. We look at foods quite differently. We look at our food systems differently. And so this initiative has challenged us all at USDA to really think differently about what foods we're subsidizing, where you can get financing and what types of foods you can get financing for. The bison is a really good example. We're really rethinking how we're investing in bison, both from a procurement standpoint, but from cultural perspectives as well.
Historically, tribal citizens living in poverty took part in a commodities program or food subsidies. We all know about the sought-after bricks of cheese, love it or hate it, but Thompson says there's another new initiative.
In the FDIPR program, or commodities, how we call it at home, historically the federal government purchased whatever they wanted to purchase, sort of at the national level. And it wasn't local foods and it wasn't indigenous foods. And the Indian country has been asking for this change for quite some time. And so we have this new pilot project where 8 tribes are able to design their own food, pick which contractors they want to purchase from, and it's no surprise. They're buying indigenous foods from indigenous producers, and it's been incredibly successful.
Thompson relates the challenges of the Equity Commission.
Yes, we actually have 2 tribal citizens on the Equity Commission. We're very excited about that. They have met several times now, and they have had very hard conversations. You can imagine, as I just shared, USDA was not created from necessarily an indigenous perspective or from minority farmers' perspective. And so there are some challenges, some very real challenges, both now and historically, about how the programs operate. And so I appreciate the honesty in which they bring to this conversation and the challenges that they have brought to us to really think about.
On the Res trade show floor, a new agriculture business called the War Chief Collection was created to combat alcohol and drug addiction. ICT's Mark Trahant has the story of how this idea became a reality.
One of the extraordinary things about the Res conference in Las Vegas is the sheer volume of people doing really interesting things. There are all kinds of businesses on display with things they're doing to make the world better. One really interesting business technique is to take what could be a negative and turn it into positive. And one of those ideas is to take wine and beer and turn it into non-alcoholic products.
Jody Colbert is on a mission. She wants to give people a real choice about whether to drink alcohol or not. She said this idea started when her great-grandfather visited her in a dream.
In my dream, he told me that's where I'm going to build. And so that's what I did. And the visions just kept coming and it just won't stop.
She says these alcohol substitutes could really help save lives.
Because we don't have non-alcoholic beverages in Indian country. And that's the problem because of the combat that we're having with alcoholism on the reservations. It's a touchy subject for me.
Many people today talk about healthy choices. Usually that means a lighter meal or food, but it could also mean a beer with dinner, minus the fermentation.
In Las Vegas, I'm Mark Trahant, ICT News.
The National Center recognizes 40 individuals under the age of 40 for their leadership and contributions to their community and family. Carly Griffith-Hotbit is in the 40 under 40 class this year. She's the Associate Director of the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative.
We had a pretty fortuitous founding by a couple of very dynamic Indigenous women. Stacy Leeds was the Dean at the University of Arkansas School of Law, first Native American woman to be the Dean of a law school, and Janie Sims-Hip, who was on faculty. And Janie and Stacy really got us off the ground with the intent to better serve tribes and tribal producers in supporting food initiative efforts. We cannot be truly sovereign unless we can feed our own people. Food sovereignty is a component of tribal sovereignty. And so our goal is to help reduce the barriers to access to resources and federal funding and programs, and also encourage our stakeholders to have their voices elevated for policy changes to better incorporate opportunities for Indian country.
The Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative builds bridges to help all aspects of the supply chain.
We offer direct consultation with tribal producers and tribal governments and also tribal organizations to help address and make recommendations about how to navigate Indigenous agriculture. We know that we have a lot of nuances associated with being Indigenous producers in the United States, including how we hold land, different access to markets, and different challenges that aren't necessarily experienced by non-Native producers and governments. And so we know that sometimes it takes a little bit of extra help or a little bit of a broader perspective to really capitalize on the opportunities that exist. So the resources that we have available are anything from infographics to how-tos, guided worksheets. We have what's called the EATS Academy, empowering agriculture through sovereignty, and have developed a series of resources available to help people get started and know what direction to head in, whether they're wanting to start or scale up their agribusiness operation.
Climate change impacts agriculture in big ways.
When we're talking about climate change, that affects people in a variety of ways, but a lot of the things that we're seeing are a lot more weather volatility, and drought is a big example of that, and we're seeing a lot more issues with drought come up. So when we are looking at opportunities to be resilient, that means taking care of the resources that we do have and how we use them. Irrigation infrastructure upgrades is a big one. We're looking at ways to have a smaller carbon footprint and eat food more locally so it doesn't have to cross the country 3 or 4 times before it hits your plate. And reducing the inputs that are needed to get food from ground to plate is something that we're hearing a lot from a climate change perspective, because we know if we're able to use less or need less, we use less and there's more available and we don't have such a competition for resources.
The Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative has programs for youth.
So one of the great things that we offer for young people, we have a youth summit every year, every summer in Fayetteville at the school. Encourage youth from 18 to 24 to come participate in our youth summit to learn more about opportunities in tribal agriculture. It's not just production agriculture, it's not just cows and plows. There are a ton of job opportunities available, and I feel very lucky because I didn't know that my job existed. When I went to law school, I never thought that I would get back into agriculture, but I feel very lucky to have the opportunity to work in tribal governance, agriculture, policy and law, and it's a very exciting field, and I would encourage anybody to check it out. There are a lot more opportunities in agriculture than just what people think of initially.
We bring you another recipient of the 40 Under 40 recognition, honored for their leadership, initiative, and dedication, and for making significant contributions in their community. Brian Polite is the chairman of the Shinnecock Indian Nation. I asked him how he feels about the award.
Deeply humbled, really, and it's kind of crazy because I'm 39, so I'm like right at the cusp, so it's a good way to go out of my 30s, it really is, and I was just deeply humbled. Indigenous communities across America for so long been put on the back burner of society, and seeing all of this res and all of this movement on economic development and diversification is awesome. I'm just proud to be a part of it.
The Shinnecock Nation only recently received its federal tribal recognition.
So we got fully recognized back in 2010, although we were on path since 1978. So a lot of infrastructure building has taken place since 2010. We've been able to reform our constitution, create a federally chartered corporation called Shinnecock Sovereign Holdings, which has allowed us to diversify our economic revenue streams, and really trying to build our nation for the future. And it's really helped with the federal funds, especially the ARP funds that just came in really helped the nation move forward. And we wouldn't have been able to qualify for that without the federal recognition designation.
Sacred site protection is a concern of the Shinnecock Nation.
We have a Graves Protection Warriors Society that fights very hard. It's a group of tribal members that, with the support of the government, has really been challenging not just the state of New York, but the local municipalities as well. We have a very historic site that has over 3,000 to 4,000 burials. And in my community where I come from, it's called the Hamptons. So you have mansions on top of these sacred sites of ours, and they've really been fighting the Graves Warrior Protection Society, and they've been successful. They've been able to get the town of Southampton to purchase some of these properties, and so that we could restore some remnants of peace for our ancestors.
ICT's Caitlin Onawa-Boycell met an Acoma Pueblo citizen who has been attending the Reservation Economic Summit for over 10 years. Let's take a look.
I just enjoy coming out.
Susan Saraceno drove over 9 hours to get to Las Vegas to make sure her artwork didn't break. She told ICT the reason she keeps coming back is because of the people.
And I enjoy meeting and talking with people and sharing my artwork.
Susan has been using her pottery skills for over 27 years now and says all her work attributes to her culture.
Well, with the Acoma pottery, you'll find two types of pottery on my side. I work with both the traditional hand clay coil pots, which generates back to many generations of our history and to our people.
Pottery from Acoma Pueblo is gathered traditionally. It takes 2 to 3 days to hand make just one item.
Go out into the mountains and we gather our materials, our clay, go out and gather rock formation and it's a bit preparing. It's not very easy. We dig the clay and mine it from a cave, and they tell us to go out with clear minds, strong heart.
In Las Vegas, Nevada, Caitlin Onawa-Boycell, ICT News.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. I'd like to thank our crew in Las Vegas and the staff who wrote, produced, and edited our newscast back home. I'd like to give a shout out to Sky Bear Media for helping with our equipment, and of course to the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development for the invitation to cover this event. We have many more interviews to share, and we'll bring you those next week. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.